Welcome to the deep dive for this week. Don't forget to visit the website at deepdiveau.net. Check out our socials and Patreon page at the Deep Dive AU. Subscribe via your favourite podcast app or like and subscribe at our YouTube page at the Deep Dive AU.
The Deep Dive podcast mugs are now available for purchase and are currently on sale. Just go to our merchandise page at deepdiveau.net to purchase one. Don't miss out on this opportunity to grab one for yourself or as a thoughtful gift for a fellow podcast enthusiast.
This is the Deep Dive Podcast. And here is your host, Michael Coles.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast Roundtable discussion titled, What Does Inclusive Education Look Like? Now, we've got 5 panelists here on the panel, here on the Deep Dive Roundtable. First of all, we're going to introduce Sarah Middleton from Brilliant Little Gems. How are you, Sarah?
I'm very well, thanks, Michael.
So what do you actually do at Brilliant Little Gems?
I support, through Brilliant Little Gems, I support parents of neurodivergent children as well as professionals working with neurodivergent children.
Okay, so we've also got Charnee Gregson from Neurodivergent Educator, or ND_educator on Instagram. How are you, Charnee?
I'm great, thanks.
So what do you actually do with your Neurodivergent Educator platform?
Yep, so I work directly with neurodivergent school-age children and also with their families, with their teachers, with anybody who's in their care team and who plays an active role in their life. I also deliver professional development to anybody working in that space as well, to do it in more affirming ways.
Okay, sounds great. So we've also got Kate Elizabeth from the Beyond the Neurotype podcast and the Village Therapy Hub. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So what do you do at the Beyond the Neurotype podcast? I know you're partly the host with Emily Williamson, but what do you do at the Village Therapy Hub specifically?
Yeah, I'll let Emily talk about Beyond the Neurotype. At the Village Therapy Hub, we support children and their families and the communities around them in all kinds of ways. Really, it's about meeting the child exactly where they're at and as exactly who they are, and then advocating for everyone else in their world to share in that viewpoint.
Okay, so we've also got Emily Williamson from the Beyond the Neurotype podcast. So can you explain the Beyond the Neurotype podcast for me?
Hello, thanks for having me. So Kate and I have a podcast Beyond the Neurotype, which we've started really as a way to have broad discussions about ways that people live their lives in an affirming way. But we focus a lot on neurodivergence and ways that systems, particularly education at the moment, but systems in all parts of life can be modified to be more accessible.
Okay, and welcome everybody here to the Deep Dive Roundtable. So first of all, I'm going to be asking, what have you found, and this is anybody can actually sort of jump in on this to answer that, what have you found to be really good features in the classroom for neurodivergent students?
So it's going to be one of our teachers, surely. Surely one of our teachers is going to talk to this. Looking at you, Millie and Charnee.
Hi, Michael. I'm just the first thing that I know that really works really, really well with students in the classroom is kind of creating a space that kind of is accessible for everybody. So there are some really kind of easy kind of things that you can do as a teacher, such as putting visuals on the board, making sure that your space is safe and affirming. You've got a safe space. You've got multiple ways people can respond. These are just some of the little things that as a teacher you can set up straight away to make sure that students of all neurotypes can access the learning and present it the way that works best for them and gives them choice and agency around that. So they're probably some of the ones for me. I'm sure Charnee probably will agree with me with some of those things too.
Absolutely. Every single one. Yeah. And I think just coming from a place of supporting executive function 100% of the time, so as you say, it's the visuals and things as well, but it's having things broken down in lots of accessible ways, all of the micro steps that need to be done as well, because so much of the time our students, our neurodivergent students, really struggle with that task initiation and being able to kind of start to get that ball rolling. Whereas when we support the executive function, rather than wait for them to have a problem and then try and support them, they're already kind of, they're already reluctant and feeling disengaged when they have to ask for help. So let's help them to be successful from the very beginning.
In Charnee, you'll find that what you were talking about was you won't find the students just sitting there. The students will find excuses in that moment if they don't know what to do and don't know how to start. So what you'll see in the classroom is students getting off their table, talking to someone near them, going to the toilet, having sore tummies. You'll find these are the things that you'll see in the classroom when it hasn't been broken down for them. And they won't say, I need my steps broken down for me. I don't understand the task. They're going to do those other subtle kind of things. And that's some of the things that potentially teachers are unaware of executive functioning and doing what you're saying, Charnee, but breaking it down, they don't realise. And that's kind of some of the stuff that we're going to see, like you'll see in students in the classroom.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. So, second question I'd like to ask you is, can you tell me what has been the horror stories that you've discovered in schools and that aren't exactly neuroaffirming? Now, Melissa, you've got some good points in relation to that. Can you explain to me about that? I know you've made some Instagram posts about that.
Yeah, some really terrible things in the classroom I'm finding, and there's some subtle ones and some really outright just refusing to actually accommodate and saying to people without a diagnosis you cannot have accommodations. That is, some schools have actually said that to parents and to students, and we know that that's not true based on the discrimination laws in 1992 and the education standards, that reasonable adjustments must be made for students with a diagnosis or an imputed diagnosis, which means anyone that we think might have a diagnosis. So they're the outrageous ones. But there's also some things like just, saying to students and dismissing things that parents are saying, like, she's fine, she's really, really great at school, she's doing so fabulous, she's got friends, she completes the work to like 110%, amazing. They're the kind of students that we're missing, and they're not listening to our parents who are going home and saying we're seeing all this stuff at home because they're just melting down from the giant stress of the day. So these are the two types of stories that I'm seeing a lot, and that people are coming to me with issues that they're having contacting the school and actually communicating with the school, and the school being on board with some of those. And you might have some others, other people on the panel might have some others to kind of contribute as well.
I think also that you can't sort of perform 100% of the time. You just burn out. And that's also sort of like, going from the school to the workplace. That's also really important as well. Basically, sort of not putting 100% in all the time, because we actually take that literally. So you might like to add to that. Anybody on the panel?
Yeah, I think we certainly experienced that. My daughter is autistic, and in her first year of school, I spent the whole year kind of saying to a teacher, like, oh, we're having a lot of meltdowns at home, like every night, 2-3 hours after school. Like, my child's really distressed. Oh no, there's nothing going on. Was very much pegged as the anxious or the helicopter mum, and particularly because I had an only child. And it was the last day of school for the year when my daughter, who had a meltdown at the gate every single day after school, all the parents knew when they heard the crying that it was my child. And the teacher happened to be on that gate duty and saw it, and you could see like the shock on his face. And it's like, yes, this is what I've been saying for the past year, that this is our experience every day. And yeah, it wasn't until we then moved schools the next year and were able to experience a lot. They were brilliant before we even had a diagnosis. They used the imputed diagnosis to access all sorts of supports that we just weren't getting, and the difference was night and day.
Yeah. So I know, Sarah, your son Charlie had a big sort of like, how do I sort of describe it? A big sort of like burnout episode due to that particular issue. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, the high masking. I mean, I just relate so much to them doing incredibly well. And he's quite strong academically, and therefore was probably usually considered, and quite well behaved in class, so considered to be doing really well. But he was holding it all together in relation to challenges he was experiencing just with the environment, not being a good fit for what he needs as an autistic person. And there's also then the flow-on effect of the environment being overstimulating, too much noise, too much movement, difficulty concentrating, and a lack of even predictability in his day. So he wouldn't always know how things were going to go, unexpected changes, changes in how the class was managed depending on who the teacher was, and things like that. He was just spending so much energy managing all of that he ended up being unable to have energy for the social side of things. And so the friendships became really difficult for him. And he would speak about, I just, at recess and lunch, Mum, I just need a break. And all the kids are out on the oval, and they had one big sort of synthetic oval where there'd be 5 or 6 games occurring. And so therefore there's balls flying everywhere, there's lots of shouting, there's all those dynamics of certain kids wanting more of a go, that sort of thing. And with him not being particularly sporty when it comes to ball sports like they were playing, he would just be completely exhausted by trying to engage with his friends who were moving, playing, manage the social dynamics. The other thing that was affecting him was, I think, around food. As his stress was increasing in the school environment, and it wasn't being recognised or understood, he was having more and more difficulty with actually being able to eat. Like most of us struggle to eat and digest properly when we're stressed. And when you've got all of that sort of sensory environment, a lot of smells, and visually seeing lots of other foods, he found it really difficult to be able to fuel himself. So it was like a perfect storm of his energy just deteriorating and his physical health and mental health worsening.
Charnee, you've also had a horror story at your school. Can you, at your son's school, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, it was a horror story with a happy ending, but so there were some charts that went up this year for the first time. So every school, as part of this school-wide behaviour program that they have, had 2 posters up in the room. One was, behaviours we want to see more of, and the other one, behaviours we want to see less of. And it was really quite alarming to see the behaviours we want to see less of sign up there, because what I ended up, I went in and actually had a meeting with the principal and said, look, like, I understand that this is coming from a place of needing some way to manage behaviour. I know that that's really challenging in a classroom. I know that firsthand. I'm a teacher also. But this is not the way to do it, because unfortunately, almost everything that you have listed there on the we want less of this behaviour, it reads like a Vanderbilt assessment. It reads like, these are all of the diagnosable, observable traits of an ADHD diagnosis. So really what you're saying, and you've got it emblazoned on the walls, is that neurodivergent behaviours, distress behaviours, are unacceptable. They are bad behaviour, and it makes it out to be a choice. So not only are you having a negative impact on the self-esteem of the students who naturally do engage in those behaviours more frequently, but you're actually having an impact on the culture within the school itself, because you are inadvertently teaching ableism. You are teaching every student in that room that those behaviours are bad, that they are a choice, and that they are unacceptable. And that with the right amount of willpower and the right level of severity of consequences and punishments, that somebody could decide to be differently behaved. And that simply isn't true. So thankfully, the principal ended up deciding that, yes, that's a good point. Thank you very much. And we've removed all of the we want to see less of these behaviours posters. So that was a win. But that's not the case in every school. I wish it was. I know that those posters are everywhere.
Kate, have you had any sort of issues that you found through the Village Therapy Hub?
Yeah, I was just wanting to add on to what Charnee was just saying, that I attend a lot of SSGs, and one of the favourite things that like to be said is, well, it's really important that they learn to adapt, because the real world won't accommodate to them. The real world will be unpredictable. They need to build resilience. Don't you just love the word resilience? So, I come across that all the time in terms of, well, no, we can't make one predictable person to support them or meet them in the morning, because when they get out in the real world, they won't have someone that's always there available to support them in the morning. I'm like, okay, well, this child's 5. Do we really need to be considering when they're 25? And also, wouldn't it be an amazing opportunity for us to teach children? Like if school only worried about teaching children to understand who they are and what they need and what works for them, they would come out so far ahead of where they're coming out right now. Like, what an incredible skill to learn.
Okay. So next question, how can we move beyond accommodations after the fact to proactively designing learning environments that support all brain types from the start? Anybody can actually sort of start the conversation on this.
I always feel really bad just jumping in, but this is something that I love, and it's something that I know that others on the panel agree with too. But the universal design for learning is where I think we need to be looking. It's something that is available. There is information out there. It's not something that's just, we're making up as we're going. There is actually information out there about it. And it's about, rather than, like you said, Michael, putting in accommodations for 7 different students in the classroom, we're putting in these accommodations, I guess, prior, you're setting up the environment to accommodate everyone's neurotype, so that even the ones that are masking and the ones that we can't quite see, they are getting the same accommodations as well. It'll help them inadvertently through this, and it's going to help everyone. And also, these accommodations generally don't hurt the ones that don't need it either. They actually support everybody. They support absolutely everybody. And there are some really easy things that if you set this up as a school and train the teachers to know and understand this and know what to do, we're going to see a lot less of distraught trauma in a lot of our neurodivergent students in the classroom if this is the way we set up our classrooms.
Okay. So also, can we also explore what it looks like beyond to build inclusive classrooms using universal design for learning?
Do you want to go, Charnee, a little bit? I know you're kind of
yeah, sure. I don't want to monopolize. Like even today I was having a discussion with somebody because I'm speaking with their teachers just about the fact that a lot of the time we will differentiate, well, all of the time we're differentiating based on our students' abilities and that kind of thing. But it's not so much that teachers are not doing it, it's the way that it gets done. So when things are pitched as, this is the standard, this is the task, this is the level that I want you to be able to accomplish. Oh, but, group A, I know that you guys are going to find that really hard. So let me differentiate down, and then group C, you guys, you're going to smash it. So let me differentiate up. And it doesn't matter whether you name the groups after, numbers or fruits or animals or whatever. The kids know who's in the smart group and who's in the dumb group. They call it that. So really, I think it's giving the kids actually the agency to be able to not only sort of have that introspection and look at, well, what skills do I have and what level can I achieve at, but also respect their fluctuating capacity that day, so and this is all students. So rather than actually assign the kids a particular group and differentiate sort of up or down from what we think is like the target task, is to actually introduce various different levels and give examples of those things and be like, okay, I want you to, everybody, teach the content, teach the concept. Right, we've got a learning activity. This is what we're going to do today. If you're having a walking day, for example, then I'd like you to have a go at trying to do it like this. It could look like that. If you have a little bit more energy and you're having a jogging day today, then you might do it and it looks like this. If you've got way more energy and you're having a running day, then it might look like this. And if you are sprinting, maybe it looks like this. But nobody is assigned a group, and every single level of achievement is seen as valuable and acceptable, and everybody gave their best that day. I think it's also so important to make sure that that all output is valued, that it's not, this was the intended task, but you couldn't do it, so I had to differentiate down. No, don't show me where I'm aiming for and then I can't even get there. make the tasks available to everybody at every level.
And can I add into that what I see is that often those groupings are created from a test. So, there's a let's do your test before we teach you this maths and see where you're at. And I have so many kids that say to me, I can't, like, the testing conditions don't work for me. And then I get put in a group and I'm in the group thinking, this isn't pitched at my level at all, because I got put in this group based on the test conditions that I was put into. And then those children are distressed, and just the ripple effect is massive.
Anybody else like to sort of contribute to this sort of question, exploring what it looks like to build inclusive classrooms using universal design for learning?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think it also is really important to allow the children to choose rather than othering. Like, I think there is a lot of unintentional othering of children with accommodations or with a diagnosis. And so, oh, well, Johnny's going to do this task here, and the other kids can see that Johnny's task is different. And as the children get older, especially, like, they don't want to be othered. They want to be the same as all of their peers. And so, often it can look like in my daughter just doing no work at all and sitting there drawing rather than participating because she doesn't want to actually choose or accept the accommodation that she has to do it differently. So she'll kind of sneakily try and do it in a way that's under the radar to pretend like she's doing everything else. And I think also it allows students to, if with fluctuating capacity, if they're having a good day, to be able to extend themselves, that we give a accommodation, Susie doesn't have to do X, Y, Z. Well, maybe on this day, Susie really wants to give it a crack. She can choose to give it a crack rather than being pigeonholed and put in a box. Oh no, Susie does something different.
Yeah. Sarah, would you like to add to
Emily?
that?
Yeah, I'm thinking a few things as I'm listening, and I'm just thinking about what Kate was saying about the experience of a student who gets put into a group and then doesn't feel like it's the right fit. And through the Force for Good campaign, we talked a lot about student voice and listening to kids. And the thing that I've seen time and time again, and I've been working in schools or around schools for a long time, is that this doesn't seem to often be something that's considered. Let's talk to the child. And in fact, I've seen it with my own children. I'll talk to them about what's going on for them and get all the information and then take it and try and communicate it with school. But in terms of actually them being invited to have a discussion, and I had this vague memory as Kate was talking of a teacher I had in primary school who used to ask us up to just check in with us. So we'd go to their desk and they would have a little check-in. And I was just thinking, what about that kind of a concept where you're able to have a check-in with each student? Maybe it's only once a week because we've got to be realistic and where do we fit this in? But what would it be like to actually check in? How are you going? How's this project going? How are you feeling about this? How are break times going? Like, just have a little bit of a checklist of let's check in on all of these things. So as the children have an opportunity to maybe say, I'm really bored in maths, or I'm finding it really hard. I know I can do well, but actually that's exhausting me at the moment. I don't have much energy left after maths and it makes the rest of the day hard. Can we actually be listening to the children and also letting them know that, hey, your experience really matters to us and we want to encourage you to speak about your needs. But first of all, we've got to start by acknowledging they have needs. So when we are using compliance-based reward systems, for example, like Charnee was talking about, but, the positive behaviour support is just, it's everywhere. And I heard several times at the Yellow Ladybugs conference last week, presenters explicitly say, stop it. It is causing our neurodivergent children significant harm. So when we talk about universal design for learning, that model of this is what we want from you and this is how you do it and please comply regardless of how you feel internally, that needs to go in the bin.
And I think it sort of goes back to masking as well. I think sort of masking, they're starting to actually sort of like teach masking at primary school, and I think that's awful. So
Yeah.
also sort of the noise factor, I think through the Force for Good campaign, I think you discovered that 92% of classrooms have the noise level as not acceptable to students. Can you explain to me about that, Sarah?
Yeah, we did. And so this is another interesting thing, talking about and hearing my son Charlie tell me, it's really loud, Mum. It's just, it's just too loud for me. I can't concentrate. I'm losing a lot of energy from that. Communicating that to school and the response being, oh, we don't have any concerns about the noise levels. We're very comfortable with how it is. And, leadership are regularly walking through that, the senior part of the building. And if we had any concerns, we'd address it. And that, as you're seeing your child experience burnout, become more and more unwell and less able to attend school despite loving learning, for me, I go looking to understand. And one of the things I discovered was actually this research that's come out of a university in Australia. And they discovered, when they actually looked at the recommended levels for educational settings and for classrooms, they actually discovered that, yes, 92% of classrooms failed to meet standards, recommended standards for noise levels. And so that was a really subjective kind of issue around noise levels. It was, almost like your son's autistic and sensitive to sound, but there's actually no real issue here. Mm. But no one went in and checked, hey, what are the actual recommended levels and what's the decibel here? And, that sort of thing is really, it feels a bit like gaslighting to neurodivergent people when they're told there's no real issue. It's just, and essentially the message is, they don't have to say it. It's just you.
Mm. Would you like to add to that, Charnee? Have you experienced those noise levels in the classrooms?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's really challenging. I've had some classes that are just very chatty classes and very chatty cohorts. And there's always going to be groups of students who do. They come up and they will actually say, oh, Miss, it's really loud. I'm having trouble concentrating. And in that moment, it can be very difficult as the teacher because you're sort of going, well, look, technically, everybody's actually on task. It's group work, for example. And so there's a certain level of talking and noise that is expected. But that doesn't mean that child who complained about the noise isn't experiencing it as too loud. So two things can be true at the same time. This is an expected level of noise. However, it's too much for you. So it's not okay just to go, well, the majority, it's fine. Therefore, I can't meet your needs. Sorry. It's going, well, how else can I meet this need? Can we have some groups that take place outside so that there's fewer layers of noise happening? Can I sort of be mindful of where children are placed in the group? Maybe if it's not good weather or whatever. A lot of, not all of them, but a lot of classrooms will have I've always called it the quiet room or the breakout room, but there are ways that you can do it. If you can't change the environment, can you provide a tool so that the person can navigate it okay? Are there some loop earplugs or some headphones or something like that to kind of muffle the noise? Find out as well whether there are extra layers of noise that you might not even be clocking. Is the student finding the buzzing of the electricity under the fluorescent lighting too much? Is that adding to the distress? Because the noise level of the people talking, while it may be unavoidable, it may actually, it's just that they're getting overloaded. There's too many things. And if we can kind of peel away some of the other ones underneath it, then we might find it tolerable, actually, after all.
Mm.
I think on the flip side, Charnee, sorry, Michael, I think on the flip side of David, I love giving choice and having the choice of the different spaces and giving that choice of where to go and help with the noise level as well. But also I've experienced teachers that have had complete silence in their room, always complete silence. And that on the flip side also isn't good, because what about students that need to talk? To learn and talk to kind of, so you've got the flip side of both. And I think either extreme is where there's the problem. And that's where you come back to that universal design of learning of, if we set the environment up for choice and agency, and, your son, Sarah, saying, look, this is too much for me. And rather than being gaslit, he's being told, okay, well, what's your choice? How can we accommodate this? But then also, what choice are you going to make to be able to help, do your best learning? What helps you do your best learning? And that's the same for everyone in the class. what helps them do their best learning, what environment, what space, what tools do you need? Do I have all that ready to go? And they're taking charge of that. So when they're an adult, you know, they can they've got all that ready to go, and they can just use the tools that work best for them to help us learn. As adults, we know there are certain things that we need to help us do our best learning and our best work. That's the same with the kids, and teaching them from that younger stage is that universal design for learning. So there's that flip side. I think I was listening to you, Charnee, and I kind of was thinking, you know, I've seen complete silent classrooms, which would be great for the decibel, I'm sure, but not every student would work that way. I know myself personally, I need to talk. I have to talk my thoughts. I've got to get them out. I've got to express them with someone to actually know what I'm learning. Otherwise, if I'm sitting there silently, it's going to go probably in and out of my ear. So you've got to have that balance, and that's why it really is tricky for teachers. But there are some things that they can do if they kind of make sure they're listening to their students and designing that environment from the start.
Okay. Now, in the next question,
sorry, Michael.
Yeah, you can interrupt me, Sarah, please.
Just from that research, you know, because what Charnee and Melissa have talked about is so useful. But then I think actually we're talking about building design. So it's well beyond the individuals, and it's not necessarily about right or wrong about how people are going about things. It's the design of the building. And through that research, I learned more about there's actually standards for school buildings in terms of noise management and absorbing sound and things like that. And a lot of them aren't designed well for that purpose. And then you can retrofit all sorts of things to help with, you know, managing noise. So I actually think it's not so much of a human issue, although I will say in terms of structure of class size, that's probably another one. And the physical layout. So we've got, you know, some schools where we've got really open plan approaches. But I actually think this noise issue comes down to those sorts of things far more than what the teacher or the students are doing.
Now, the next thing, Sarah, you actually sort of like you mentioned in the episode with Charlie that we did on the Deep Dive podcast, basically talking about how we sit, attend, listen to information. You know, and we've had a lot of comments in the the sharing in Instagram, basically sort of saying that they're sort of like, you know, the adults in the room basically experiencing the same thing. So how do we actually sort of try and make things a bit more flexible in the classroom with inclusive listening?
What I'm hearing, like in all the sharings that everyone is doing, is about, again, coming back to that piece of how do I know what I need, and then how do I meet that need? And teachers are in as much of a position to have that experience and to be able to name those things and be able to model that as anybody in the room, because as humans, we have different needs on different days. And the assumption that, oh, because I've got that diagnosis, I'll always need that thing, versus you who doesn't have a diagnosis, so you'll never need that thing. Whereas we're all, from a mental health perspective, actually having universal accommodations allows for us to be able to see who's struggling that we may not have noticed was struggling because they've never needed that accommodation before, and now suddenly they're making use of that, and we can get really curious about what is going on for them and why might they actually be needing to access that. It's similar to the check-ins that Sarah was talking about before. So I don't know if I just answered that question at all.
No. Please feel free to interrupt. It's all good. It's all good. So anybody else like to sort of contribute to how we sit, attend, listen to information here and how to make that flexible? Anybody?
Well, yeah, of course I've got ideas on this. I've been thinking a lot about it through having conversations with Charlie, and then with the Force for Good campaign. Just so many conversations were sparked about people's experiences. Again, I think it comes back to when we're concerned with prescribing what something should look like, and the focus is on the external, we miss a whole lot of information about the internal experience. And we were very lucky with having Connie from Social Stencil actually write an article recently about, she said to me she wanted to have a go at explaining the neurobiology of what was occurring inside of Charlie when he was asked to do traditional whole body listening. And of course I got very excited about that and said, yes, please. But essentially, so that article is available. But essentially, it comes down to when you are told that listening looks a certain way and it doesn't actually work for you in that way, then it can cause a lot of stress. And when we're being, for example, rewarded for compliance, or indirectly perhaps experiencing negative consequences for not complying. For example, if you're fidgeting on the floor and the rule is no fidgeting, hands in laps, then even your peers may respond to that with, a lack of appreciation for your knowledge of what you need, and more just around, well, you're meant to be doing the same thing as the rest of us. Or it can be a glance from the teacher even. If those are the expectations, then it's reasonable for the teacher to uphold them. So I think we need to really look at what are the expectations and shift away from what it looks like to thinking about what do we need, and also how do we consider that this is a shared space, because I understand the importance around it's a shared space. What we're doing in terms of being able to attend to information and process information needs to be consistent with considering others in the space as well. So that might be that you actually prefer to stand. So when the teacher's giving instruction, you might stand at the back. So as no one else's, line of sight is blocked, but you're able to meet those needs. Or you really need to fidget, and it's really important that that fidget doesn't make a big loud sound so others are distracted and can't hear the teacher. So it just needs to be a suitable fidget. And being really curious about the different ways that we can give this a go and try it out. Using visuals to represent. So for example, Social Stencil have got a great poster with someone sitting up the back on a table and all the different ways you can be listening, and encouraging the students to just notice, was that helpful or did that distract you? Oh, isn't that interesting? For them, using a fidget was really helpful and helped them focus and listen. And for you, you found you were so distracted by the fidget that you didn't even hear what I was saying. I wonder what else might work for you. So that kind of curious and modeling of these are the potential options, but let's have fun, let's be curious. You do that for a little while and the kids naturally fall into habits of this is what kind of works for me today. And again, it's that today it works for me, tomorrow it might be a bit different.
So next thing I'm going to discuss is the inclusive education gap. Now, I know you guys are basically, I think you're in different states from me, and I'm not sure about the Queensland one, but can you describe what the gaps are that you found having an inclusive education space?
I think one of the obvious gaps for me is attendance. In the 2023 Senate inquiry into school refusal, 78% of children identified as frequent school refusers are neurodivergent. So in Victoria, there was some statistics recently that it was 73% of those kids in that inquiry were neurodivergent. 38% of students are experiencing chronic absenteeism from school. They're big numbers, and I think they're hitting the neurodivergent cohort really hard. So for me, that's the biggest screaming gap, is that the kids aren't able to go. They don't feel safe to attend. So they're being excluded from accessing an education because their needs aren't being met by school.
Melissa, have you got any thoughts about this?
Obviously, the attendance is becoming worse and worse every year. And it's something that I know that education ministers and education leaders are saying that they're caring about and that they're thinking about. But the problem that I kind of see, and I kind of looked into this a couple of months ago, I actually looked into all the states for their inclusion policy and what each state was kind of doing. And each state has got some form of an inclusion education policy with varying levels of implementation throughout the state. I'm in Victoria myself as well. And in Victoria, we do have, there are some more things that we're doing compared to other states in terms of making a bit more of an affirming kind of, way of looking at diagnosis and inclusion. However, there still are gaps with implementation in the classroom. So I actually wrote to Jason Clare, the Education Minister of Australia. He responded to me last week, actually, I was actually surprised that I got a response. It was from his office, not from him. But what I got in the response was, oh, we're really important. We understand. These are all the things we've already got available. So they listed to me, and I can send you, Michael, some of the things that Jason Clare listed. But he listed multiple different websites that the governments have in place that teachers can access to help them with inclusion. So videos they've made, and there are some great resources out there, but what I'm finding, and I researched with a teacher group on Facebook, I surveyed about 900 plus teachers, and I asked them if they felt that they were capable, they felt like they were capable to teach neurodivergent students in the classroom, and there was 95% of the teachers said that they did not feel that they were capable and qualified to actually cater to the needs in their classroom. They weren't aware that there were documents like this out there. They weren't aware of the inclusion policies. They're not aware of the Discrimination Act or the standards. They are not taught during university. They do. A lot of teachers commented in the comments that they'd done one module out of their entire 4 years, one module on potentially not even neurodiversity, but it was like, going through different diagnoses like autism, ADHD, and they learned what they were, but they didn't learn how to actually, what to do. Like, it's not actually being taught what to do. I'm doing a master's at the moment, and there's little bits in that, but even then, most people aren't doing their masters, and like, it still isn't like enough. So I think the biggest gap that I'm kind of finding, and like I said, I'm trying to formulate a response to Jason Clare's letter, because I wasn't completely happy with just being given resources that were already there. Yes, I know they're already there. That's me. I know they're already there. But what about every other teacher doesn't know that? So many teachers don't know they're there, and they're crying out for support, and they just go, I don't know. A lot of teachers set off students unwillingly, because they have no idea about brain biology, about neuro, like all of the stuff that we're talking about today. They seem logical to us, but we've all kind of done a bit more of a deeper dive. And if you're not living it, I've got kids with neurodivergent. I am myself. If you're not living it, I think you may not have gone down that deeper route to actually know those things. That for me is the biggest gap. And all of this stuff, this unknowing and the change of environment not happening, that's causing the attendance, that's causing our students to have trauma and want to go to school. And it's a really, really big problem with the system as a whole. And I think our voices and us talking about it is the most important thing that we can do, because if we keep going back to these people in power that can control, the classroom environment or the buildings, like you said, Sarah, they're things that are sometimes out of our control, but teachers need to know these things, and they need to be taught at uni. We need to be doing ongoing PD, and there's so many things that can be done that aren't, and teachers just aren't aware of it, and it's just continuing in a little bit of a cycle, I think.
Okay, Charnee, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. So, that's something that I was going to mention as well, is just that lack of teacher knowledge about not neurodiversity in general. I think we're getting there. We're not where we need to be, but we are getting there in terms of knowledge and understanding about masking and that sort of thing. So there's a greater breadth of knowledge with that in the profession, but what there isn't is, as Melissa was saying, like, so what do I do with that? How do I change my teaching practice now that I know that, this student's autistic and that student has ADHD and this one's dyslexic? How do I actually accommodate that in the classroom? Because it's not enough to have knowledge about what the disability is. Teach me how to change what I'm doing so that I can actually better accommodate not only this child, but every other child as well. So much of the time, because we teachers, we really do deeply care about our students, but a lot of the time, if it's the first student that we've had with this particular presentation of whatever it is, we kind of learn what it is because of them, and we learn how to help them. But that's great for the next person who comes along, but that student needed us to already know that stuff, So yes, it's wonderful. Yes, it's not the teacher's fault, because we have to learn, and we can't know what we don't know until we know that there's a gap, and then we address the gap. But all of those students who we didn't know that stuff for are missing out on having a student who gets it and who can help them in the way that they need to be helped.
And I know we're actually running out of time at the moment, but we will need to do a part 2 on this because I know we've only just really scratched the surface on this, and we need to make a little bit more discussion on this. So I'm really appreciative if you guys can come back at a later stage later in the year. But Charnee, first of all, any final thoughts for now?
Look, I think really, you know, my philosophy is always to treat every single student in the class as though they're neurodivergent. You know, because I think Melissa, you said it, but there's no disadvantage. Nobody's going to be disadvantaged if you treat everybody as though they may potentially need accommodations. They're free to not take them up if they need to, but having them available for everybody can tell you an awful lot, even about those students who you might otherwise have missed.
Kate, any final thoughts for now?
That looking at this from a holistic perspective actually benefits the teachers as well. We need to look after our teachers. And when our teachers are able to understand and know about their own nervous system and their own needs for regulation, and they're able to make adjustments for entire classrooms rather than carrying the mental load of one-on-one adjustments, it will change completely the experience for every human in that room.
Millie, any final thoughts for now?
Yeah, I think on the back of what Kate was just saying, I think the teachers are the people that we need to, like, they're on the ground and they're crying out for it. Like, they want support and they want us to help them. And I feel like tackling the teachers and working with our teachers is going to give us the most amount of kind of bang for our buck, I guess, because they're the ones that really care and want to actually do this work.
Emily, any final thoughts for now?
Yeah, I just want to see more systemic change from a government level in terms of supporting schools, supporting teachers, to ensure that children with a disability can actually access an education.
And Sarah, any final thoughts for now?
I think that it's really important that, in terms of systemic change and in terms of change in schools, that we're really listening to families, to children's experiences, and listen to teachers' experiences. Let's hear them and say, okay, from every group, everyone involved in education is experiencing challenge, and let's actually listen in terms of lived experience too. We've got so many wonderful professionals and educators out there who also have lived experience and deep knowledge of autism, ADHD, other learning differences, neurodivergence more broadly. Let's listen and take on board and plan from there.
And thank you guys for being part of this really important conversation on what does inclusive education look like. We'll have a part 2 later on the year, and we invite you to sort of let us know at the Deep Dive AU what your thoughts are and any sort of questions for the panelists for our part 2. Thank you, guys.